Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to That'll Be the Day. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking to a visually impaired environmental campaigner whose civil resistance resulted in her spending 4 months in prison. But before we hear from Jane Touil, if you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. And as always, I'll be playing a track by The Vow at the end of this podcast. To find out which one I've chosen, stay tuned.
That'll be the day your open invitation comes my way.
Now here's a question for you. How far would you be prepared to go to fight for your principles? Write a letter to a newspaper, phone a radio station, or go on a demonstration maybe? Well, Jane Touil from Rochdale feels so strongly about what she considers to be climate breakdown that she embarked on civil resistance, which landed her behind bars. Apologies for the occasional sound glitch here, but for reasons which will become apparent, Jane and I had to record this chat on Zoom. This is Jane's story. Well, good morning, Jane. Long time no see. Welcome to That'll Be the Day.
Thank you, Tom. Lovely to see you too.
Full disclosure, Jane and I worked together some years ago in the early 2000s at Henshaw Society for Blind People when Jane was working on what was then the Skill Step course and I was doing some publicity. But since then, our lives have taken slightly different paths, but we'll talk about that later on in this podcast. Before we do that, Jane, you've had quite an interesting year already. You spent some weeks of it at His Majesty's pleasure as a result of the protests you've been involved in. What are your thoughts on climate change as we sit here on yet another very warm day?
Yes, well, it's not really climate change because, that change is a sort of neutral word, isn't it? Things can change for the better, they can change for the worse. It's climate breakdown, it's climate collapse. The prospects are very grim, to be honest. And you will see very frequently in the media people writing opinion pieces or editorials saying, oh, it's all hysteria, the scientists have got it wrong, it's not really that bad, we can adapt, it's just a question of, doing things a bit differently, it's too expensive to make the changes necessary. And that's all basically lies. And if you look at the science, if you look at what the actuaries are saying, the people who do the risk assessments that inform the insurance industry, if you look at the national security briefing provided to our government earlier this year, which they are incidentally refusing to share the detail of with the government's own select committee on climate change and environment. It's so scary they're not even sharing it with a parliamentary committee at the moment. The future is truly apocalyptic unless we take very, very radical action now. And the solutions are there. And the reason they're not being implemented is that politicians have been bought by corporate interests, vested interests.
There are
those vested interests also control the billionaire media. They control the messages we're seeing that tell us it's okay, carry on as usual.
There are some politicians, senior politicians, Trump amongst them, who say that climate change is a hoax, it doesn't exist, and we're worrying over nothing. What do you say to them?
I say follow the money. And I say the C word, corruption. I think a lot of our politicians, a lot of our states have been captured by corporate interests and they serve those interests. Massive political donations buy you influence. He who pays the piper calls the tune, basically. And, it's infiltrated our politics here quite dramatically.
Well, we'll talk about your role in the protests a little bit later on, but let's go back to your early life, because you did politics in the end at Sheffield University. I know you started studying English, I think it was, and then in your final year, you started to realise you had an eyesight issue, let's put it like that. Talk me through what happened exactly.
Because I was studying politics, I did originally go to study English language and literature, but, there was a miners' strike on and being a politically engaged individual, I was very interested in what was happening politically in this country. And I didn't go to all the lectures because nobody ever does. So I borrowed the notes that some of my co-students had made of various lectures, and I found that I was really struggling to read them. Struggling to read handwriting was the thing that sent me to the optician. I was already wearing glasses. I was long-sighted, but there wasn't a history of any eye problems in my family other than, people wearing glasses. And I went along to the optician, and where they shine the light in the back of your eye? Well, that happened a lot. And then I got this grid of crossed lines, and I was asked to look at it and see, tell what I saw. And there were lots of other tests done by this optician that aren't usual in an eye test. And at the end of it, he said, I think there's something going on at the back of your eye. I'm going to refer you to the local hospital for further tests. And the ultimate outcome of that was that I was diagnosed with a genetic eye condition. And I was told that I was going to lose my central vision. They didn't know how long it would take. They didn't know exactly how bad it would get, but there's no treatment, no cure, and come back when it gets a lot worse.
Just a side note, I used to send my tape recorder into lectures that I chose not to attend. But I did write up the notes, I hasten to add, at some point. But I was there in spirit, if not in body. So when you graduated, obviously you would be thinking about work. What were your thoughts in that regard? Because I imagine you were probably a bit nervous about the whole idea of then being a visually impaired person trying to find a job.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be extremely difficult. I already knew that I shouldn't bother to learn to drive. And I was just terrified. I thought that my eyesight would gradually go, and then I'd get to the point where I couldn't work. So I did a qualification in teaching English to speakers of other languages. And I just went and worked in different countries. And my idea was, well, I'll see the world while I still can. And I just pretended to be a fully sighted person for as long as I could get away with it, and it just became harder and harder and harder, as you can imagine.
It's quite difficult and quite stressful trying to blag, isn't it?
Yeah. But I couldn't see any other way, and there was that awkward period where my eyesight was failing, but it wasn't bad enough for me to say I'm partially sighted and carry a white stick and get all the adaptations and stuff. It was just my eyesight's not very good, and because it was my reading that was affected, all the different sort of things that I had to do. Like I tried to encourage my students to. This was like the late 80s when computers weren't sort of widely available in the developing countries, and I was teaching in a university at one point, and I was trying to encourage my students to type their essays, type their homework, because it would be easier for me to read. And I insisted that everybody used a black pen and wrote on white paper, and anything that could just make it easier for me to do stuff. But I came to the end of the line in my late 20s, and I had to admit that I needed to come back to this country and face the music.
Tell me about the countries you worked in, just very briefly.
Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Hong Kong.
Wow, quite a tour of the Far East.
Travelling, yeah.
Quite a tour of the Far East, but you came back in your late 20s because you were, as you say, you were concerned then about your eyesight, to face the music, as you put it. What did that involve? What did facing the music actually mean for you?
So I went to my doctor, got referred to the local eye hospital in Manchester, got registered partially sighted instantly. I got issued with a symbol cane. I got referred to social services, and they came and put raised dots on various bits of equipment. And eventually I was taught touch typing as well, which was immensely useful. I also went to the job centre and got put in touch with a disability employment advisor. And I had avoided computers because, they're bad for your eyes. But, having accepted that, my eyes were going to go regardless, I thought I ought to get some IT skills. So I got referred to a local council-run scheme where I got some IT skills. And then I got a job working at Henshaw Society for Blind People.
Where we met.
That was a bit further down the line, but yeah.
I have to say, I don't know what you think about this, but I think you've already answered it in some ways, but much as I hated learning to type, and we had an awful typing teacher at Worcester College for the Blind, it is one of the most useful skills I've got.
Absolutely. Touch typing is a great thing, and assistive software on the computer. And it wasn't long before I was registered blind, after I was registered partially sighted. But my eyesight has really remained relatively stable. So I still have really quite good peripheral vision. I can move around quite confidently, particularly in familiar spaces. But yeah, it's the reading and the computer work and touch typing is, yeah, a really good skill.
So just before we talk about employment, in terms of software, then you're using speech and magnification, you've just said there, which is interesting. So I just use speech, as you might remember. I just use JAWS these days. So you got to Henshaw's. Tell us about the application process, what that was like, because I imagine from what you've said that Henshaw's wouldn't have been the first choice of organisation that you would have worked for.
I had tried to work for the local FE college, carrying on teaching English to speakers of other languages, but I just found a very mainstream environment because my psychological state was that I was very stressed. This was all new to me, and I didn't have the real confidence to be assertive, and I didn't really know my rights, really. And I was in a mainstream environment where I was just dreadfully embarrassed and underconfident about everything. And I was working in the community, and the technology wasn't such that I could take technology out with me to help me. And it was just all very practically impossible. And I gave that up. And I thought, well, perhaps, if I look at something like working for a blind society, an organisation for visually impaired people, perhaps that would be easier for me as a first step, as an out visually impaired person. But I had some reservations about working for a charity for disabled people, because with my political mindset, it's like, this is like, an old charity model of disability where well-meaning non-disabled people do things for the disabled. I just think that all the additional support that people need because of their difference, whatever that difference might be, should really be provided by the state as a collective endeavour, because we're all part of the normal spectrum of how humans are. And to have to rely on charity to get your basic things that you need was something I was very uncomfortable with. But nevertheless, I needed a job. So I applied to Henshaw's and I got the job running the Skill Set course, as you said.
Just tell us a little bit about Skill Set.
So Skill Set was a funded project in collaboration with City College Manchester, which had a designated specialist unit which met the needs of deaf and visually impaired students. And there were various components to the course, but the aim was to work with small groups of visually impaired adults to help them explore where they were at and where they wanted to be, and then to support them to get the skills that they needed or wanted to get to that place where they wanted to be. So for some people, they'd experienced recent sight loss, and they wanted to learn how to use a computer as a blind person, or they wanted to be able to access certain courses in order to reach their eventual employment goal, or they wanted voluntary work in order to develop certain skills to get into employment eventually, or they wanted to get back into work straight away. And there were lots of people, some recently visually impaired, some people who'd been visually impaired all their lives, but have got a bit stuck and wanted to see what they could do about that. So yeah, a real variety of people, and a very small group, maximum 6 people on a course, 12 weeks, and a sort of work experience component to it for those who wanted work experience. There was computer, IT skills. There was quite a lot of confidence building and knowledge around disability rights. And we had loads of visually impaired people working in different areas come in to talk to the group and answer questions. So yeah, a sort of like an all-round package to help people on their journey.
Did working for Henshaw's help you to come to terms with your visual impairment?
Yes, in a certain way. I think I've been on a very long journey, and in some ways the hardest bit was when I wasn't an out visually impaired person, when my eyesight was going. I didn't know anything. I was terrified. I was in other countries and I was desperately trying to pretend to be fully sighted. But once I got the symbol cane and some adaptations, and then I got the knowledge around disability equality, legal rights, and the confidence in using those tools that I got, I became a lot more comfortable, and that's been an ongoing process. So Henshaws, I think, was an important stepping stone, and I did meet lots of competent, happy, visually impaired people, as well as some less confident and less happy visually impaired people. But it was, I also got on really well with the City College staff, and they're lasting friends that I hang out with even now. So yeah, in many ways it was a positive experience.
You mentioned there pretending to be fully sighted. So just going back to your time when you were abroad, did anything happen there? Were there any interesting, funny, embarrassing incidents that you're prepared to share?
The thing that triggered me to decide that I really couldn't do it anymore and I had to come back was I was working at the International Islamic University in Kuala Lumpur. And the oral exam, they're sort of like, there was a listening exam. And like in this country, like somebody puts a tape in a machine and all the students are in the exam room and they listen to the machine and they, answer the questions on the exam paper. In the university, a member of staff read out a script. And because we were native speakers, and the local staff, used to come and pick one of the native speakers of English and say, you're going to be reading the listening exam today. And I just got handed the script and told to go and read it to a group of like 150 Malaysian students sitting there listening exam. And I knew I couldn't do it. I looked at it and I thought, I can't read this. I certainly can't read it fluently. I hadn't been able to read fluently for a long time. And fortunately, one of my friends on the staff who knew about my issues stepped in and said, I'll do that for you, Jane. And I thought, I can't do a job where I'm relying on other people to step in and save my backside. So that's when I decided to come back. And that's all I'm prepared to say, Tom. I'm not going to share any more stories, but there are lots.
Fair enough. No, absolutely. But the thing about Henshaws, and I remember this as well, is that kind of thing wouldn't have been an issue at all. They'd have understood that straight away, I guess.
And I've learnt, because I wasn't always an extrovert, I think I've actually sort of developed a kind of extrovert persona as a kind of shell, a protective shell, so that when embarrassing things happen, as they do all the time, it just sort of bounces off me now and I turn it into a funny experience. So even, in Henshaws, it was fine. They understood. But even in the outside world now, where people don't necessarily understand, it doesn't impact me anymore. I don't feel embarrassed. And I'm very assertive, very... I've developed ways of getting what I need, getting the support I need, and being very jolly about it. And people like to help. And what I found is I am actually being good to people. I'm being kind to people by giving them an opportunity to feel good about themselves. Because when we help other people, we feel good.
Absolutely. Quite right, too. I try to do the same 99% of the time. There's every now and again when, of course, we all get a bit frustrated. But touch wood, most of the time we manage it. So having worked for Henshaws for a while, you moved on to another organisation, this time an of charity, as they're known, an organisation of disabled people. Tell me who they were and how the management of that organisation differed.
Yeah, so I went to work for Breakthrough UK, which does what it says on the tin. It's run by and for disabled people. So the majority of the staff and the management team and the board were disabled people. And it was well grounded in the social model of disability, which sees the world slightly different to the traditional models of disability, where they think that the person is defective and has to be fixed. The social model says that, disabled people have impairments. They're part of the normal spectrum of human beings. And what disables them is the fact that society is not designed in a way to be accessible to them. So, for me with print, I'm print disabled. A lot of the time I get given things in a format that I can't access. If you provide me with assistive technology, magnifiers, a speech on my computer to read things to me, then I'm not disabled anymore because I can access the same information as other people do. So that organisation was very refreshing. We did lots of work with mainstream organisations to make them more accessible. We worked with disabled people to facilitate employment, inclusion, equality. I did a lot of work on disability rights and equality legislation while I worked there. And again, it was another stepping stone in building my confidence.
And I imagine very different from Henshaw's in that it was quite radical. The thing that always struck me about Henshaw's was that they were very unwilling to comment on any contemporary issues that might affect visually impaired people. I suspect Breakthrough were at the very opposite end of that continuum.
Yes, Breakthrough used to put out position statements when anything interesting happened in the world of disability equality. And yeah, very radical in their approach. And Henshaw's, yeah, decidedly apolitical, but, you know, everything is political. And the charity model, that their main concern seems to be getting donation. And sometimes that involves portraying disabled people in a certain way, which is not empowering, which is as victims or needing help and support from kindly benefactors. And that, you know, that really grates because it's confirming people's preconceptions about disabled people not being capable.
So after Breakthrough, you went on to the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman. What was your job there, and how was your visual impairment dealt with by them and by you?
Yeah, so Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, this was my, I am ready for the mainstream again. I applied for a job. The application process involved an assessment centre, which they tried to make it accessible, but it wasn't. So I had to put in a complaint. So right at the start, there was a barrier that had to be overcome. But anyway, I did get through the interviews and got a job in 2009. And I stayed there until 2022. And, well, the organisation and I went on a journey together. It was very pressured in terms of casework. I was appointed to be an assessor, then an investigator, and then a caseworker. The job titles changed, but the work didn't change very much. It's basically looking at complaints about government departments and the NHS, speaking to complainants, gathering evidence, analysing evidence, applying the regulations or law or whatever, weighing up everything, coming to a conclusion about whether failings had occurred, if so, whether they'd resulted in an injustice, and if there was an unremedied injustice or something that needed to be put right, then considering what recommendations we might make. So that was basically the job.
Was the work accessible? Were the systems accessible for you?
Well, they all changed while I was there, and the computer systems were not brilliant, but then they introduced a new system which was even worse, and then tried to remedy that with another one that was even worse. And eventually I ended up working for the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team because my job had been made basically impossible. But that sounds terrible, doesn't it? But, you know, the nature of the work was such that, you know, big decisions were made by people, and suppliers were contracted, and they said all the right things about, oh yes, our software is accessible, oh yes, this will happen, oh yes, that will happen, and then they delivered an inaccessible product. So it wasn't all PHSO's fault. They went on a learning journey. There were other disabled people employed there. We had a staff group which was very vocal. They did appoint an inequalities person after I persisted asking for it, and that made things a lot better. So things gradually improved. It wasn't easy, and some major things in terms of casework management systems happened that made my job difficult. And then towards the end, of course, COVID, I couldn't work from home because my assistive software couldn't work with the system, or so I was told, whereas my colleagues could work from home. And then when it was COVID, they did find a way for me to work from home, but it wasn't ideal. So there were many, many, many issues, but the organisation did listen to a certain extent. There was staff representation, and I did receive a fair amount of support. So I wouldn't be unduly critical of them. I think a lot of mainstream organisations, there is a willingness, but there's a lack of knowledge. And there are, you know, large systemic issues at play because, you know, accessible procurement is a main thing, isn't it? Is a major thing, and procurement hasn't been sorted out in a lot of organisations.
I think your experience will be shared by any visually impaired person who's had the good fortune to be able to work, particularly for a government organisation.
Yeah. I got so good at advocating that they introduced a new role in the staff called the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, which had come out of the NHS and was really a route for staff to raise concerns and get them addressed by senior staff without having to go through a damaging formal grievance process. And I was selected to be the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian for the whole office because I was so good at it.
Knowing you as I do, Jane, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
I really enjoyed that role.
So while you were working with the Health Service Ombudsman, Jane, did you at some point become radicalised, or were you always radical?
Well, I've always been very engaged in politics. I was a member of the Labour Party and trying to get a fairer, more just society, more equal. I was always interested in social justice. So I was politically engaged. I wouldn't say I was particularly radical. I wasn't advocating for revolution, which I am now. But I did become increasingly worried about the climate crisis and government inaction in relation to it. So really, I started really paying attention in 2019, and I started making big efforts to read scientific papers, listening to people who knew what they were talking about on YouTube. And through the Labour Party, I got to hear of somebody who was setting up a branch of Extinction Rebellion in Rochdale. And I joined that in late 2019. And then, of course, COVID happened, but we did some socially distanced and bemasked actions in Rochdale, all very tame, didn't get arrested, but, targeting Barclays, which is one of the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry, and a notorious bank for funding all sorts of nasties, including apartheid, if you go back far enough. In Africa. So yeah, I did those sorts of things. And then if you remember COP26, the Conference of the Parties, the annual gathering of governments around the world to talk about climate breakdown and what we're going to do about it, which has been spectacularly ineffective for 30 years in actually making any change. Because emissions globally are still rising and new fossil fuel projects are still happening, and the burning of fossil fuels is the major cause of climate breakdown. So there we go. And lots of fossil fuel lobbyists attend those conferences, and they outnumber many delegations from nation states. So I went to COP26 in Glasgow, and I think that is the turning point for me. I went up and I did all the things like carrying a placard, doing a die-in where you all lie down and pretend to be dead, and there's all sorts of storytelling around who died and why, and it's supposed to be a dramatic representation of what's coming if we don't change our ways, and what is happening in other parts of the world now, but we're not looking at it. I went on marches, I sang songs, I went to vigils, and I felt quite good about myself, Tom, because, this sort of thing makes you able to deceive yourself that you're making a change, that you're doing something that's effective. And it was all very ineffective. It was performative. It was a whole load of people who were concerned going up and basically saying we're concerned, but it didn't make an impact on the outcome of that conference or the outcome more generally. But at the same time, there was a group of people called Insulate Britain who decided to do something really extraordinary, and that was sit on the M25 and stop traffic, which was immensely brave of them, immensely radical, immensely polarizing in terms of people's reaction to it, and they were heavily criticized. But what they did was they were like a human fire alarm that's waking us up from our collective slumber and also our collective self-deception. We know there's an issue, but we don't want to look about it. And there's this really loud fire alarm which makes us look at what's happening, that draws our attention. And that's what they were. And they got so much media coverage. And Roger Harrabin of the BBC, was their environment correspondent, he said they achieved more in 3 weeks of sitting on the M25 than he had done in 30 years of working as the environment correspondent for the BBC. And I thought, this is what's getting media coverage. This is what's causing the conversations. This is influencing the public discourse. And, the Social Change Lab have actually now done academic research into all the impact of Insulate Britain. And they've said that it had a massive impact in terms of government policy. Down the road, the government then put billions of pounds into a home insulation scheme, and it drew more people into climate action. They may not be sitting on motorways, but they joined Friends of the Earth, for example, or they supported Greenpeace. So there's a real pull effect of waking people up and drawing their attention and giving them the impetus to do something. And I looked at that and I thought, I can't deceive myself anymore. I have to think very seriously about where I put my energies, because I don't want to look away anymore. I can't look away anymore. But I don't want to con myself by thinking I'm doing something when I'm actually not.
Just before we talk then about the protests that you actually got involved with, I'm guessing that you were at the Health Service Ombudsman and decided to hand your notice in at some point. Was that because you'd just become so radicalised that you felt you just had to do something?
Radicalised can have negative connotations. I think I woke up to the reality and I was prepared to face it and take the necessary action. We're in an emergency situation, and in an emergency situation, you don't just carry on as normal and pretend nothing's happening. So I did realise that I was going to enter into civil resistance, as they say, and do disruptive actions to try and build momentum so that we all stop doing business as usual and start putting ourselves on a war footing, which is what our king said we needed to do at COP26. We need to be on a war footing. We need to be looking at this stuff and changing what we do. So I knew I was going to enter into civil resistance and support the Just Stop Oil campaign, which came after Insulate Britain. And I was still working at the Ombudsman's office then. And I took action with Just Stop Oil, and I got arrested in April 2022. And I started helping out with the campaign in my spare time, organising talks and things like that in the evenings for people. And I realised I was putting more and more energy into that and not really doing my day job. And also I did inform the Ombudsman that I got arrested and I might be convicted, and our staff policy, our disciplinary policy said that if you're convicted of a criminal offence, that's automatically gross misconduct and you'll be let go. And I basically said to him, are you happy for that to happen? Because, I'm taking action on my conscience. And this is an organisation which believes in natural justice. And he said, to his credit, he said that he would ask the Board of Governors to review the disciplinary policy because it was up for review anyway, and he would take account of my situation. But basically the cognitive dissonance of, doing business as usual, day job in the daytime and then doing all my activism in the evenings and weekends, it was just unsustainable, and I couldn't hold the two worlds, as it were. So I handed in my notice in June 2022 and devoted myself full-time to the climate situation from August 2022.
So you got arrested in April 2022. Tell us about that. What did you do that caused the police to put you in handcuffs?
Well, not a lot, really. It's such a disappointment for your first arrest, really. I mean, all joking aside, it is a tremendous step. And I thought about it very carefully. I thought about, how hard it is as a disabled person to get a decent job and to hang on to it and to fight to keep it for so many years, which is what I did. And it was a complete struggle over that period. So to then morally decide that you're compelled to give it up, that was a huge step for me, because I'm giving up financial security, and also the decision to get arrested I didn't take lightly, because I've been a law-abiding citizen all my life. I paid my taxes. I expect to be kept safe by my government, and they've broken a social contract. The basic contract between a government and its people is we'll keep you safe and you obey all the laws and pay your taxes and jobs are good. But they've broken the social contract. They're not keeping us safe. They're not taking the action that they should be taking. And that's how I justified getting arrested, taking action that might lead to arrest. So there were actions at oil terminals. That was the first round of actions for Just Stop Oil. And I went down to the oil terminal in Warwickshire, Kingsbury Oil Depot. And there were groups of us staying in different places. And the idea was to travel to the depot and to do a number of different things. Some people wanted to climb over the fence and occupy the site. Some people wanted to block the gates. Some people wanted to climb on oil tankers, whatever opportunities arose. I was spectacularly ineffective. Me and my merry band of co-activists got dropped off in the dark in the early morning at a certain point, and we were supposed to be collected by some other people who didn't turn up. And then some workmen, we'd been dropped off near a railway line. Some workmen turned up and found us sitting in the bushes and thought, these are not orienteers, as we tried to tell them that we were. They phoned the police, who came out to do a welfare check because they thought that there were these people wandering around in the dark, not knowing where they were. And we were near an MOD firing range, which we didn't know. So the police came out to do a welfare check and then found that we had super glue and chains and all sorts on us. So I was arrested for going equipped. I got nowhere near to taking action on that occasion. And I was kept in a police cell for 12 hours and then let go. And they didn't actually pursue those charges. So I didn't get prosecuted for that particular action.
How did you feel the first time you were arrested? I mean, I imagine it's pretty scary. And the subsidiary question is, were they aware that you are visually impaired? And did the police make any sort of adjustments for that?
It was terrifying. It was very, very stressful. I was also very frustrated and annoyed and disappointed that, having taken this enormous step, I actually didn't manage to practically contribute to the intended outcome, which was blocking the oil coming out of that terminal. Other people were more successful, so I was glad about that. Yes, I did make it very clear that I was visually impaired, and unsurprisingly, the police, the arrest process is not accessible. It's very bureaucratic. You get taken to a police station, you get asked lots of questions. They print off a load of documents about your rights in custody, not available in large print. Your discharge sheet when you're released, not available in large print, and everything in between, not available in an accessible format for me. But individual police officers were interested in meeting my needs, making sure that I was okay. They knew it was my first arrest, and there was some compassion there, and some interest in my welfare. But again, the overarching system was not accessible. And I just find that incredible. Ever since 1995, it's been a legal duty. They're a public body. Just basic things that they're not able to do. Incredible.
Let's move on to the protest that was, from your point of view, much more successful, which was the sitting on the M25, stopping the traffic effectively. Just talk us through the process there, the mechanics of exactly what you did and how well the process worked from your point of view.
Okay. So, in November 2022, Jane Touil had been doing quite a lot of actions in the run-up to it, and the idea was to do a high-stakes action. A high-stakes action is when the people who sign up are prepared for the possibility of prison, that they know that there may be quite severe personal consequences, but they feel morally compelled to do it anyway. So I'd done a number of roadblocks in London in October, and I got okay with that. But this one was to climb gantries on the M25 over 4 days. A number of people would go to different locations on each morning just before the rush hour and climb gantries and unfurl banners. And the idea was that we weren't causing the disruption. We were just doing something out of the ordinary by putting banners across gantries, which you're not supposed to climb on. They're not bridges, but they some of them are very accessible. They got walkways and step ladders and high sides and stuff like that. That's the kind I chose, unsurprisingly. And the police come, and then it's up to the police whether they close one lane or a whole carriageway, and come up and get you down. So basically, we didn't know how much congestion or disruption it would cause, but we thought it would be such an extraordinary thing for people to do this over a 4-day period that it would get media coverage regardless of the amount of disruption. But we did also think that there was a possibility that the police would close carriageways while they got people down, and that would cause serial disruption around the M25, which would then get media coverage. And none of us went into this thinking we want to make other people's lives even more miserable than they already are. If you're somebody who commutes on the M25, your life has enough misery already. And that wasn't the aim. The aim was to get the media attention, to keep the discourse going, to get the change, to put the pressure on the government. But we accepted that there was a possibility that on those days, some people would be impacted, and that's, something that we had to carry with us. There's this thing, a dilemma. The Greeks called it antinomy. When whatever you choose to do, there's a bad outcome. So you're in a moral dilemma. And I thought that, 4 billion people being wiped off the planet, if we don't get a move on and do something, justifies me doing this.
There'll be people listening to this who will say there could have been people who were held up, who were disrupted, who were doing very legitimate journeys, maybe an expectant mother or somebody on the way to a funeral. I mean, what would you say to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am really sorry that we are in a situation where ordinary people like me feel morally compelled to give up my job, have no income, live off my savings, and risk prison because our government is failing us and the fossil fuel industry are spreading lies and have done for decades to deceive people into thinking that we can carry on living as we are. And there are people dying in huge numbers, suffering and dying in huge numbers in other parts of the world because of the situation. And it's only going to get worse, and it's going to cause lots of people to die in this country. And it is a terrible, terrible situation. And I'm very sorry that those people missed hospital appointments or were late for funerals. And it's terrible. It is really, really terrible. But what else can we do when petitions have failed, when writing to our MPs have failed, when normal demonstrations have failed, and when the newspapers are full of lies all the time, telling people not to worry?
Can we just go back to the gantries, because that sounds completely scary to me. Do you think that you were helped by the fact that maybe you couldn't fully see the danger that you were in?
Okay, so it was carefully planned, very carefully planned. I signed up on condition that I didn't have to do it alone, because on many of the gantries, you actually had to have climbing skills, and there was some climbing training for people who did that, and they had safety harnesses and helmets and everything. Everything was tethered, so nobody dropped anything on the carriageways. I signed up to climb an easy gantry, which there's a metal gate and a vertical metal step ladder. You climb the step ladder, you get onto a walkway which is solid underfoot and solid sides up to shoulder level, so no prospect of falling off it. And I said I would do it if I could do it with somebody else. So I was one of the few people that did it with a companion. And we, as I said, talked about all the safety things. We had harnesses, we had tethered stuff. And the idea was for me to record a video talking about why we were doing it, the urgent and desperate situation. You can find it on YouTube, it's there. And talking about a third of Pakistan being underwater, thousands of people dead, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people displaced, and all the people dying in East Africa from the famine and drought. And begging our Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, not to issue any more oil and gas licenses. They were issuing them at that time. They were giving people permission to drill out more of the stuff that is going to get us all killed. So I did that. It was pretty scary, but I was assured that the gantry would be as I described, and it was. And I am scared of heights, and it was terrifying. And I've never been so scared in my life. But I felt morally compelled to do it, and I stand by what I did, and I've taken the consequences, and I accept the consequences. You know, this kind of stuff, this non-violent civil disobedience, we are accountable for what we do. We feel it's necessary, but we stand by and we take the punishment for it. Unlike the CEOs of fossil fuel companies who haven't been punished at all for what they're doing.
How did the police get you down?
So the police turned up. We actually climbed after the rush hour. I think I got onto the gantry about 9:30. They turned up at about 9:40. They shouted up to us that we were under arrest. And then it took a while for some vehicles to arrive. All this time, the traffic was free flowing. You know, the traffic didn't stop when we climbed the gantry. Everything was free flowing. And then they brought a heights team, so people who are skilled in climbing, and they have ropes and stuff. They didn't tell us to come down under our own steam. We didn't get that option. They sent the heights team up. I complied with them. I did everything that they asked me to do. I put on their harness and their helmet, and they lowered me down the steps. And while that was happening, they closed the carriageway, and they reopened it once we were put into the police van.
And presumably then you were handcuffed, taken to the police station and charged, etc. It just followed the usual process. Was it any more accessible this time than it had been previously, or exactly the same?
Different police stations are slightly different in their approach. This time round, I also think some of it comes from me. I was less agitated in terms of arrest because I'd been arrested several times by this stage. So I was more comfortable and relaxed, and therefore that impacted on the way I spoke to officers. I was less stressed. And I think, if you can speak in a very calm and measured manner, then you get a calm and measured response, or you're more likely to anyway. So, yes, they went out their way to print stuff out in large print for me. I also knew more about what I was entitled to in custody. So you can ask for a shower, you can ask to brush your teeth, you can ask for various things, a change of clothing if your clothing's dirty, whatever. So it was fine. And they do regular checks on you. And in the middle of the night, I was informed that I was going to be charged with causing a public nuisance, which carries up to 10 years in prison. And the guy who came, he was very emotional. I could tell that he really felt bad having to say this to me, because police officers are human beings. And the guy who was on the heights team was telling me all about his mountain bike and his solar panels. They have ways of telling you without telling you directly that they're sympathetic to what you're doing.
How did your family and friends react? Were they surprised, or did they kind of think, oh, well, Jane's been on this journey towards civil action?
I mean, part of the consequences of what I've chosen to do are that, some family and friends are very against. And, I have had difficulty with close family members trying to make them understand. Their attitude can be, well, life's already hard enough. You're visually impaired. You've struggled to keep your job. Why are you throwing it all away? Can't other people do this? Is it really that bad? All those sorts of questions. But fortunately, some family members have come round and been quite supportive. Others have learned not to mention it. It's like they don't really approve, but they're not going there. They just stay silent or change the subject. I've kept a close group of friends who are incredibly supportive, and I've made many new friends through being involved in this community of civil resistance. And they're all fab, the people who do this sort of stuff. They're all very moral, caring, wonderfully connected, helpful people, the people that you would want as friends.
I know we're skipping out a lot of your life here, but let's move forward to the trial itself. Am I right in saying you represented yourself?
Yes.
So how did you go about preparing, particularly with the mountains of documents that tend to be generated in a court case?
It's incredibly difficult as a fully sighted person. It's even more difficult as a visually impaired person. So firstly, everybody involved in the criminal justice system, all the barristers and the courts, they all use a government platform, a government secure intranet to share information, and they all have access to the case file, and they all upload all their stuff, the police, the CPS, everybody, and they're all talking to each other on this government secure intranet. And if you represent yourself as an ordinary person, you have no access to that, and they keep forgetting that you have no access to that. And also, they won't email you anything because your email is not regarded as secure. So they will only send you hard copy information through the post, which they often forget to do. And then my whole layer of, I can't access standard print. If you want me to be able to access this information in court as well as at home, where I have all the kit to interact with standard print, I've got a CCTV, etc. You need to send it to me in large print, and also I need it to be not too big, not too small, so I can see it with my glasses mounted magnifiers in court. And please don't put it in Times New Roman. I need it in a sans serif font, and this, that, and the other. So I give them all my requirements, and they just completely ignore anything and just send it in standard print because nobody's read the memo. And then I have to go back and say, no, this isn't accessible. I won't be able to access it in court. And a lot of stuff is done on templates, especially police witness statements and things like that. And they can't go in and change them. So what they do is they just blow everything up into A3 and send it as it is and say, that's the best we can do. And so, you know, how difficult it is. I have to hold things right up to my face to see them with my 10 times magnifying glass on my glasses, and holding up a massive wad of A3 papers is just practically impossible. So yeah, it's been difficult. And also on the stand, you're supposed to give evidence without really reading a script. So I've had to memorize loads of stuff when I'm giving evidence, and when I'm giving my closing speech, I have to really commit it all to memory and speak extemporaneously rather than read a script.
Do you wish you'd been represented by a barrister in hindsight?
No, because, well, one, the legal aid is incredibly difficult to get. And if you lose the case, then you have to pay it all back anyway, if you have any assets at all. Legal aid is like a unicorn, basically. You think it might exist, but it's almost impossible to get it unless you own absolutely nothing. And also, we want to talk directly to the jury because the laws have been changed many, many times. New laws have been brought in. Existing laws have been changed. The definitions of certain words in certain laws have been changed to make it almost impossible to get a not guilty verdict. Now, the government has been very repressive, very anti-protest. And so often we find ourselves in a court and we have no defences in law. So there's no benefit to having a barrister, because if you have no defences in law, there's nothing for them to argue.
It sounds to me like you were fully expecting to be found guilty. And I guess when the verdict came back, it was no surprise to you.
Well, yes, and because of the way our trial was run and because we weren't given the defence of reasonable excuse. Interestingly, just a few weeks prior to our trial, another group of people who'd done exactly the same thing, climbed on gantries as part of the same 4-day campaign, they'd had a trial in another court where the judge had allowed them the defence of reasonable excuse. They talked to the jury about the context. The prosecutor had agreed some climate facts that were in the jury bundle, the information that the jury can see. We weren't allowed any in our trial. And they were all found not guilty for doing exactly the same thing. One of the things that I want to actually bring out here is before I started doing all of this, I thought that our criminal justice system was basically fair, a bit ragged around the edges, a bit underfunded, but basically consistent and fair. And it's not at all. You know, you can all get involved in the same action, and you can have some people whose cases never come to trial, the cases are discontinued. Some people go to trial and get found not guilty. Some people get hung juries and have to do a retrial. And some people get found guilty, all for doing exactly the same thing. And the judge has tremendous power to decide how to run certain trials. And yet, so some of my friends got found not guilty, had no consequences at all, and I got sent to prison for 20 months.
I want to talk to you about being sent to prison because obviously, again, as a visually impaired person, you would have quite legitimate additional needs. How were they communicated to the prison, and did you get any of the rights that you might have expected to get?
So the prison system is under tremendous pressure, and so it is broken for everybody. There are some individual prison officers within it who try desperately to do a good job and make things work, but essentially the whole system is broken, and some of the prisons are private and some are public, and they don't talk to each other. They have different systems, as you would imagine, and of course the private prisons are run for profit. So everybody convicted in London courts, if they're female, they're sent to Bronzefield, which is a privately run, purpose-built prison, and everything is inaccessible if you're visually impaired because it's all run on a kind of a screen, like an iPad on a stand, and all prisoners queue up to use this thing, and everything to do with your prison life is run on this pod. They call it the pod. everything from asking questions, requesting things, getting healthcare appointments, choosing your menu for the week, everything, reading emails sent in by your friends, everything, seeing how much money you've got in your account. You cannot survive in prison without having access to this. And it is completely inaccessible if you're visually impaired. And also, people whose language is not English, or people who are not confident using technology. There's all sorts of barriers, and they do nothing to overcome those barriers. So I was completely dependent on other prisoners to access that. And a lot of it is very confidential, personal stuff that you might not want other prisoners to know. Fortunately, my co-defendant was with me for the first 2 weeks while I was there. And she did everything for me, everything. I would have been completely up the Swanee without her. And she was in the process of being made my support worker by the prison. If you raise these sorts of issues, which I did, because I am very assertive, used every mechanism to sort of tell them of my needs. Nothing was communicated from the court. I was there telling everybody at every opportunity what my needs were, what my difficulties were. And their response is that they're so understaffed, they're so pushed, and the staff are mithered to death all the time, is to try and choose another prisoner who can help you. And that's what was in process. And then just randomly one morning, I was told to pack my stuff, and I had 10 minutes, and I was shipped off to another prison. There was no consideration of the fact that I'm registered blind, I might have additional needs, there might be support that was being put in place. I was just dragged off to another prison where they didn't have any pods. Everything was very last century. It was a public sector prison. Nothing had been communicated about my visual impairment. I had to start from scratch. I was on my own without the support of my co-defendant, and everything was paper-based, and it was all standard print. And it was just before Christmas.
So you find yourself then in an older, probably more traditional public sector prison where they don't have the pods and all the IT and everything else that you're supposed to use. But nonetheless, it isn't accessible. So how did you cope?
So I had my symbol cane with me. I had my anti-glare glasses for outside, the orange ones that I always wear outside. I had 2 pairs of glasses-mounted magnifiers, and that's all I had. I wasn't allowed my monocular telescope. That was viewed with a little bit of suspicion. And I just had to use my symbol cane the whole time and explain to people what things I needed help with. And I relied on the kindness of other prisoners. I remember in this new prison, which actually was much better than the one I'd come from. Once I settled in, I actually had a tolerable time. But the attitude of the staff was get someone to help you. So I would say they'd hand out these menu sheets, and they're tiny, tiny pre-formatted lists of things and in tiny, tiny print. And you had to tick, whether you wanted cornflakes or whatever. And then they fed all these things into a machine, and then you had to queue up for your food. Anyway, I couldn't fill these in at all. And the attitude was get someone to help you. I didn't know anyone, so I just had to randomly ask someone if they would mind helping me. And they did. And that's how I got by. Everything that you wanted to do, there was a form for it. After a few weeks, I was so fortunate. Each prison officer carries a caseload of prisoners, and they're supposed to check in with them every few weeks to see if they have any issues and how they're getting on. So my first meeting with my key worker was like, yeah, I've got all these things that I need you to help me with. And I struck gold. He'd worked in the prison for 34 years. He was very experienced, very respected, and was able to get things done. He really helped me. And I also managed to get a job in the gardens, and the guy who ran gardens was also very understanding and tried to make everything accessible. And between those two people, and the people who ran the gym as well were very good. So I managed to carve out an acceptable existence through the goodwill of some staff and the kindness of prisoners. And once they understood that I had the symbol cane and I explained myself, other prisoners went out of their way for me. I had someone who did my menu cards every week, did my canteen. You can buy things in a kind of shop and you can spend money once a week and get the items delivered to yourself. And yeah, all of those things, I managed to get support from the prison community.
More generally, what was the attitude of the other prisoners towards you? Were you seen as somebody who they might feel able to take advantage of?
So one of my concerns before I went to prison was that prison is full of bad people and I'm going to have a terrible time because they're all going to bully me and be horrible to me. And it was completely not my experience. I've been in prison twice, very briefly on remand, and once for a substantial period of time up to recently. And I've never had a single bad experience with a prisoner. People are people. There are bad people outside prison. There are good people in prison. People are people. Some people are victims of various life circumstances, and I don't judge anymore. I really don't judge because my experience has been positive. They've been helpful. They're very curious because they said things like, "What's a person like you doing in a place like this?" sort of thing, because of the way I speak or whatever. And once I explained why I was in there, they were outraged on my behalf. You shouldn't be here. And because of my visual impairment, there is a culture of people banding together to support one another. I think it might be slightly different in men's prisons where there's a lot more violence. But in women's prisons, there's a lot more cooperation and kindness and support. And let's all get through this and support one another to get through this situation that we're in. I didn't get bullied. I didn't have any negative experiences. And I made some good friends who I intend to keep in touch with.
So you were there for 4 months? Were there any negative experiences apart from the obvious one of losing your liberty?
The regime is very frustrating. Finding out what the rules are is difficult when you're visually impaired. They're pinned to the wall. I couldn't read any of the notices. And they seem to change depending on the mood of certain officers. So you're never quite sure whether you're going to get pulled up for doing something because anyway, in trying to navigate that sort of uncertainty, that shifting. I wanted to be obedient. I wanted to follow the rules and just get through it and keep a low profile. But it's quite hard to do that. And then there's just random injustices happen and random dramatic events. People get very frustrated and then they have an explosion and then they get dragged off to segregation. So there's all these daily dramas, daily frustrations and things like that. Oh, I've rambled on. I've forgotten your question.
That's okay, because I've got another one I can ask you anyway.
Oh, right. Okay.
Did you ever think of making a complaint under the Equality/Disability Discrimination Act, or did you just think, no, it's not worth it?
I did make a complaint about the chaplaincy, actually. So one of the things I did was go to the chapel on a Sunday, and I thought it was quite reasonable for them to be able to have a large print hymn book. There is an anticipatory duty, like some visually impaired prisoners or people, with dyslexia or whatever might find it easier to read a larger print hymn book. That didn't exist. The service sheets weren't available in large print. So I, after numerous attempts to get these basic things done, which I thought, was pretty standard, I did actually put in a formal complaint, and things did change a little bit.
So it was partially successful?
Partially successful, yeah. And also, the prison was inspected while I was there, and I took the opportunity to have a chat with one of the inspectors. So yeah, the overarching system, there were some barriers, but there's some very good people working within the system to help prisoners who genuinely did care. So it wasn't an overwhelmingly negative experience by any means.
Just before we talk about you being released from prison, just occurs to me, did the governor come and talk to you at any point? Was he or she interested in your situation?
No. Not at all. And there are many, many, many governors because there's loads and loads of managers in prisons. And my campaigns to get my ukulele in so that I could play my ukulele, that failed. And I had numerous exchanges with the governor in charge of reception where, things come in and out of the prison. But no, I never talked to the top governor person.
You were expecting, I think, to serve 8 months of the 20-month sentence, but you were deemed to be of low risk, I think I'm right in saying, and were released after 4 months. How was that decision communicated to you? And then what did you do? Did you just walk out the prison and get the train back up to Rochdale?
So if you fall into certain categories, it's all at the discretion of the top governor. You can be released on home detention curfew. So I'm electronically monitored. I have to be in my house from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I wear an ankle tag, which I'm very proud of. And that's what I have to wear until August, until I've served 40% of my sentence, which is the current tariff for many offences. You get a 20-month prison sentence, you serve 8. You can be released after 4 if you fall into certain categories. So yes, it was communicated to me in inaccessible print, which I got other prisoners to read to me. And then I showed it to my wonderful key worker, and he made sure that I got an accessible form, and then he got me my license conditions, because when you're released from prison, there's millions and millions of conditions, and if you break any of them, you get sent straight back to prison. So I have loads of restrictive conditions.
So what happens then, Jane? Do you just walk out?
Yes, so you notified in advance of the date of your release, and in the morning they come and get you. You pack up all your stuff, you go to reception, there's lots of bureaucracy, and you have to sign forms and have a health check and various things, and then you're released into the wild. Yeah, so I walked out through the front entrance, and a friend was there waiting to meet me. We got the bus into London. This was on the outskirts of London. It's HMP Downview. And I had my photograph taken in front of the sign saying, "Welcome to Downview." And then I got the train back up to the north where I live. And I had a meeting with my probation officer the next morning. And the rest is history.
So you're on a tag now, and that prevents you from leaving the house, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. How are you coping with that?
Well, it's better than prison. I can choose what I want to eat and when I want to eat it. I can go out for a walk. I can do the garden. I can meet some friends. So that's great. And, I'm becoming better at doing household chores, Tom. What can I say? I stay in from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. There's red wine, there's the radio, there's podcasts, there's iPlayer. And, I can vacuum clean and listen to talking books. I'm catching up a lot on my reading.
So what does the future hold for you now? Because obviously you have a couple of convictions which could impede your ability to find employment. So what is the future for you? Are you going to nonetheless try and get back into work, or will you continue with your civil action?
My immediate thing is that I have to deal with all the restrictions that are currently in place and may be in place for some time into the future. I am in the process of sorting out finances, and I don't anticipate going back into paid employment. I'm going to try and draw my occupational pension from working at the Ombudsman's office early. I turned 60 this year, so I can do that. I'll pay a penalty, but I'm going to try and do that. I get a bit of pip. So I think with all the little bits and pieces that I've got a stakeholder pension as well. I think I'll get enough to survive. And ultimately, I can't look away from what's happening. And I think lots of people feel the unravelling that's generally going on, the instability in the world and the mad things that are going on. And I will find ways to devote myself to doing positive things, whether that be pushing the boundaries, doing civil resistance, or helping out in the background, or doing community projects, helping people to grow their own food and things like that.
If there are any visually impaired people listening to this who get caught up in the judicial system, and touch wood for them and for everybody else they don't, but if they do, what advice would you give them, say, for instance, from arrest to prison? What are the key tips? Polite
persistence, keep asking, keep reminding, and be assertive, and quoting that you know about the provisions of the Equality Act 2010 seems to push a few buttons sometimes. But be prepared for additional stress. The criminal justice system is broken in general, and it's very stressful for everybody, and everybody struggles, even people who are represented. There's a whole layer of difficulty associated with being representing yourself. There's an additional layer that relates to disability impairment. But if you find yourself caught up in that, then ask lots of questions. Judges in trials have a legal duty to provide you with information that will help you navigate the system. And I have found, again, individuals working within any system, if you are polite and if you ask and give reasons why you're asking, individuals are often very helpful.
And I guess the final question is, well, two final questions, really. What have you learnt about yourself? And is there anything you would do differently?
I don't have any regrets in terms of the decisions I've made. I know that they seem pretty extraordinary to many people, but then we live in the greatest crisis that humanity has ever faced. That's what we're living through at the moment. And it's not looking good. So I think that I acted in line with my conscience. I was morally compelled to do what I did. And I will continue to follow my moral compass, because I can see the consequences of lots of people who've abandoned any sort of conscience or morality in the way that the world is working at the moment. And, you know, when everything is fluid and lots of awful things are happening, what can you cling on to other than your own sense of right and wrong? So I don't know what the future holds, but what I stick to is my conscience, my morality, and following Quaker principles. I attend the Quaker meeting locally: social justice, sustainability, truth, peace, all those sorts of things.
Wonderful. Jane, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So thanks once again to Jane for sharing her story with us. I don't know about you, but I found that really, really interesting. Anyway, it's on to the music. So how about Peace in Our Time by the Liverpool band The Vow?
Today, yeah, yeah. The cool winds of dawn phased me out. I couldn't beat the countdown. At last, without grace, I've learned how to lose. I'm on the tap that brings me back to you. I don't know, but I'm told that the truth is stranger than fiction. An ominous, anonymous message we all miss. Can a Jesus freak speak with no obvious conviction? I'll take it from you. I'm part of this. But did you ever dream of peace in our time? You couldn't keep your people in line. Maybe we should try and spend a little more time together, together, together. Somewhere, someone crash died their life, making peace like there was no tomorrow. I know, 'cause I saw the last days of Earth as it creeped inside, sank and died alone. There's a letter in the sand and it's signed, sealed and scented. An asinine line someone forgot to send to the only true blue that the human race invented. Is all of our hearts, world without end. But did you ever dream of peace in our time? You couldn't keep your people in line. Maybe we should try and spend a little more time.